Sunaina, thank you Nini, thank you to the festival, and thank you to all of you for coming this evening. If you can't hear me in the back, please raise your hand or do something to let me know. Okay, good. So we are also paying attention, which is excellent. So once again, I just want to thank all of you for being here. I'm so thrilled to be launching this book under the auspices of all these wonderful people whom you can already tell are very passionate about their city. So to be launching the book in the city, and not just in Pondicherry, but in this festival, where we are taking time for 2 weeks to celebrate Pondicherry and all of its complexities and its quirks, just really makes me very excited and really very humbled. And that all of you are also all here and assembled, really does make me so happy. As has been pointed out, I have not spent sort of my childhood here or spent all that much time in Pondi, but sort of all of you have, and I have family in the room. My father, my aunt are here, and they grew up and spent their childhoods here. They have friends who have come, and I have made friends here along the way, all of whom have very deep and complex Pondicherry stories. So what I'm trying to do with this book is collect those stories and breathe life into this strange and bizarre, but ultimately wonderful place that for all of you is home. So I have a few slides which will go through for about 10-15 minutes, and then we'll open it up for some questions and some discussion, and I just hope to hear from you as we go through this. So just as a sort of quick introduction to the book, as Dilip mentioned, there are some other books that have been written about cities as part of this series, and they're all called short biographies. And if you think about a biography, that is typically about a person, their life, their milestones, the challenges they had to overcome, the struggles they faced, the weird things, the strange legacies, the wonderful progeny, all of which make them who they are. And the argument we make with this series is that cities are just as animated, cities are just as complicated, cities are just as fraught, and have as much of an ancestry and a future, which these books hope to capture in 200 pages or less. It's absolutely readable, you can fit it in your pocket, so it's not a big heavy book, that's the idea, so that all of you will pick it up and read it as well. And the other cities that we've covered, we have Bangalore, Chennai, Bombay, Delhi, Patna, and Calcutta. Big bombastic Indian cities, the metros as we know them. So sort of what Pondicherry is doing in this series is a question I will leave for you to answer as you read the book, hint, and also hopefully as we go through the presentation today. So I want to start the book as if we're taking a walking tour of Pondi. And if any of you have taken a tour or given a tour to friends who come to Pondicherry, I'm sure many of you at some point pause at the Joan of Arc Park on the promenade to enjoy this wonderful ritual that is the game of pétanque, or as we also say, the game of boule being played. And it happens every evening as religiously as anything that might happen in the temples and churches and mosques of Pondicherry. As they sort of all gather in the evenings and play this game, the evening arrives, the sun sets, the day slows down, and there is something of a coming together and something of collecting our thoughts here in Pondi as this game sort of unfolds. So what I'll do now is just read sort of opening pages of my book to give you a flavor of the book, to give you a flavor of the city, to give you a sense of why, to me, this game symbolizes a lot of what Pondicherry is all about. As 6 p.m. nears, so literally right now, as we're sitting here, this is happening just a few blocks away, a group of men has assembled in their corner of Joan of Arc Park, divided into teams and looking serious. One of them rolls a small wooden ball onto the pitch. The two teams then take turns throwing their boots, which are heavier metallic balls, as close to the wooden one as they can. Many of you probably know the rules of pétanque, but for the sake of readers who are not in this room, here we are. Men in dark red and blue tracksuits stand, crouch, bend, test the ground in the park's northeast corner, where the grass has been worn thin by the daily roll of these heavy balls. Their uniforms, as you can see, the blue and red, announce polysyllabic South Indian names dressed up in European vowels and accents. Perumal, Subarao, Ahumugam. And on here, hard to read, but there's Idris and Tuchgold and other wonderful names. Pétanque is a measured game, a few 100-year-old French sport that mixes the daintiness of croquet with the precision of carom and the heft of bowling. Children crane their necks over the park wall to watch, or in my case, me, the biographer, the writer, someone trying to understand this city. We follow the arc of the player's arm as he simultaneously stretches and twists it before releasing the ball. Against the backdrop of waves, conversation, and calls to prayer, the game asserts itself with a toc-toc as one team's boule strikes another's away from the wooden ball. The struck wordlessly studies the striker's throw. His teammate squats and squints, examining what to do next. He aims and throws, but in vain, and the boules do not make contact. The other teammates titter, they take a few paces. The gathered pedestrians shift about and turn to the setting sun to check the time. They resume their evening walk a few minutes later, while the players, unaffected by their loss of audience, reorganize themselves. Theirs is a slow choreography which will only be completed when the sky is dark. And I go on to say a few more things in the opening chapter, which concludes with this idea that whatever we may make of Pondicherry's quaintness, this idea that a game like pétanque is as common a sighting here as cricket might be anywhere else in India, whatever we make of this quaintness, one thing is certain. It has been arranging and rearranging itself ever since it was pétanked onto a patch of South Indian land, where different boule, artists, journalists, scholars, language learners, DJs, tourists, students, laborers, shop owners, ashramites, I've hopefully identified some of you in the room and you know that you're who I'm talking about. Since all of these different boules, but that's what all of you are to me anyway, you talk against each other. And here in this park, in the Joan of Arc Park, here in this room, here in Palais de Mahe, tucked inside a long line of buildings and gardens that face the roaring waves, the game is on and the boules are in play. Some confront each other, some keep their distance, others roll purposefully in different directions. But we must watch and listen carefully, for all of these boules, all of you, and hopefully this book, is narrating a story that is plentiful, paradoxical, and polylingual, and locating Pondicherry more precisely on the map. The map that begins with the series, or with the slide I just showed you of those big, large, well-known cities, and now hopefully Pondicherry is identifying and asserting itself on that map as well. So I watched this game of pétanque being played, and it struck me that every evening the sun was in a slightly different location, the shadow of the boules were a little different, the dynamics were always changing, just as every day in Pondicherry for me the dynamics were a little different. Some days felt more Tamil, some days felt more French, some days I didn't make it beyond White Town, some days I was, as the title says, I was beyond the Boulevards, or sort of outside the Boulevards. Some days I was interested in the slowness of the city. Some days it was about those collisions and that talking, which is what punctuated for me all of my visits and all of my time in Pondicherry. And as those talks happened, a certain rhythm emerged, a certain music, a certain melody, and that is hopefully what these chapters capture as you all read the book. Hint, hint again. I will stop saying that now. So, the game of pétanque, for all of you who are familiar with Pondi, happens around here. And of course, here we have the lengthy, most recognizable or very recognizable part of Pondicherry, which is the promenade. And what I loved about the promenade was you had moments like this. You would have people sort of walking and sauntering, doing their morning and evening walks, some of which I intruded upon with some of you. You're in the room, and I've taken morning or evening walks with you, for which I'm very grateful. You had men, women, you had children, people were running, sauntering, striding. You had this fantastic group of just a bunch of dudes, walking down the street, scoping out what was happening around them. And this promenade for me symbolized what the courtyard, or what that game court of the boule game symbolized as well. which was again a clashing of people, a clashing of ideas and backgrounds, colors, castes, creeds, with this wonderful architecture on this side, which of course is not in this picture, but we have all the buildings and all of their stories on one side of the people, and on the other side, the environmental story, which I won't get into now. It is a little bit in the book, and if you really want to know more about the story of Pondicherry's environmental history and future, Mimi is the expert, and you might be a little scared, as Dilip says, when she tells you about it, but you should absolutely hear what she has to say. So, given that we have environment, we have people and life, and we have the architecture and the choreography and the layout of the city, they present themselves perfectly for someone who's trying to understand how all three mingle together to create a city and to create a biography. This is the same by night, and something I discovered when I was researching Pondicherry was that this lighthouse that we all know as the old lighthouse, was built in 1836 and was originally a laboratory for this fantastic French astronomer to come and gaze upon what was called the transit of Venus, where you could actually observe Venus traveling in front of the sun, and it would make this beautiful shape. And he traveled for 11 years in the mid-1800s to come see this and go. All kinds of things happened. It's a terrific story. It's in chapter 2. And I won't get into it now, but just each one of the buildings on the promenade had something to say about the city's past, present, or future. And one might argue, well, that's any city. Every city has monuments, every city has tombstones, gardens, parks, statues, what's the big deal? But something about this array of buildings, ashram buildings next to hotels, next to shops, next to the consulate, next to a central government building, next to a park, next to the Ambedkar monument, next to an old hospital, next to Joan of Arc Park with the Boule. That alignment is something that is so deeply Pondicherrian, and something that shows us a certain coexistence and harmony while maintaining their individual structures and their individual stories. And of course, the Mehdi, which had been destroyed and is now slowly working its way back up, is a part of that storyline as well. So if you think about landscapes and mountainscapes or cityscapes, we have here a beachscape or a promenade-scape, which made for me just wonderful storytelling potential, because I could walk down and meet someone on the promenade or meet someone in a building and find the dynamics and the conversations I was having were affected by that and tailored by that. Another story that I loved, and I think Peter is in the room and he's the one who told me the story. Anyone recognize this temple? Yeah? So we know where it is? The park, okay. And for those of us who are not familiar, the park is Bharati Park, right? If it's a small enough town, you can just say the. You can say the beach, the promenade, the park, and we know what we're talking about. But as I learned, this now what looks like an absolutely crowded, bustling temple began with one man worshipping one murti or stone that he found fit to pay, to sort of become its custodian of. And this grew into what is today an absolutely thriving, bustling temple. And just beyond this is the Ai Mandapam, which of course many of us here are familiar with, which has its own fantastic origin story. So between this little temple growing out of a single stone and the Ai Mandapam growing out of a story about a Devadasi and a king and the Vijayanagar Empire, you just have these wonderful historical moments, again, coexisting in the same park, catering to totally different audiences, being written about by different people. So Mr. Raja, who's also in the room, has spent time studying and writing about the Ai Mandapam. Again, it just made for great storytelling, and that's in the book as well. This is a monument that was sort of more personal to me. Perhaps folks here recognize Ratna Theatre, and maybe you might remember it when it was Ratna Talkies. Anyone? Does that ring a bell for anyone in the room? It did for my father, and who is also here. And serendipitously, I was speaking to someone who was working on their laptops furiously, putting together a documentary about something, and I was just chatting with him. This was during my fieldwork stages, which meant if I met you or I was sitting anywhere near you, I asked you who you were, what you did, and so on. And it was a bit intrusive, but clearly it worked because you're all still sitting here today. And this person I spoke to turned out to be the great-grandson of the family who runs Ratna Theatres. I said, I think that's the same Ratna that my father used to go to when he was young. And I'd love to just come see the theatre and hear more about it. And I did, and I got this fantastic story. And the person who showed me around told me this wonderful quote about the city. He said he likes to sit here on the perch, or not exactly here, but on sort of this elevated perch from where he can look down into the theatre. And he says, every day Ratna Theatre has 4 shows. So 4 times a day you see people coming in and people going out. And he says, if you film this, and this guy is a film buff, perhaps not surprisingly, if you film it and if you fast forward it, this is what you get. And he says, this is the heartbeat of Pondicherry. This is its epicenter. And I just love that idea, that anywhere that people gather in and out becomes that pulsing heart, which today, one might argue, is the Palais de Mahe. We'll all come in, we'll all go out. We'll all come back in again tomorrow for something else in the festival, we'll all go out. And for the duration of the festival, the whole city is that pulsing heart. But for the owner of Ratna Theatre, that movement for him was exactly what charges the city up. And I have great stories about how this family came into the theatre and all of the challenges it's faced. And again, it's in the book. This person is also in the room here today. This is Chitra Shah, and she runs a school called Satya School, and it's a school for special needs children. And how she came upon the idea, what inspired her, or who inspired her, are fantastic stories. But just so we can add more feathers into the Pondicherry cap, this is again a small snapshot, but this playground is one of the only, I think, playgrounds in India where the playground equipment is set up for children with special needs. So a child with cerebral palsy can actually experience what it's like to be on a swing, which we all may take for granted, but a child who's on a wheelchair or cannot move around so much might never be able to feel. And her playground, which is 20 minutes from here, if you get into a car and drive, does that. And it's brought together a whole community of families who have children or relatives who needed assistance. And a moment that she shared with me that again made it into the book because it was just so perfect was that she said after some families had spent time in Satya School in a playground like this and with classrooms and facilities that help their children or help them understand whatever special needs their children have, these mothers said, we are feeling really pumped. We'd like to take a walk on the promenade with our kids and not worry about who's staring at us or how, without being worried about being made fun of, because we have just as much of a right to be walking on the promenade as anyone else. And, for them, coming onto the promenade was a goal, and they did it. They walked as a group of about 10 people. They had brochures and pamphlets about the various issues and challenges that some of the children had. So if any, if others on the promenade looked at them a bit strangely, what's wrong with this person? Why does he look different? They would approach them and say, no, here's what it is. Do you know what cerebral palsy is? Do you know what MS is? I mean, I can tell you, and here's a pamphlet, and this is my son, whatever it might have been. And again, coming back onto the promenade, and this promenade suddenly becoming not just a space where we might saunter, or where we might go to watch a game of pool because we happen to be there, but becoming a space where we were asserting ourselves and being Pondicherrian, because that's where you go to walk in the evenings, was something that these women and their families took so seriously. And so for me, for someone who was constantly searching for metaphors or themes to bring all of my different ideas and interviews together, what is so central to Pondi, what is the epitome, what is that heartbeat of Pondi? Some of that ended up being the promenade, because different people would mention it as outlets for different things. In the case of Chitra's patients and clients, it was to actually be there and assert themselves. In the case of someone else who's in the audience, Dr. Vidya, it was just to be able to come here and have an evening, of peace and quiet to herself. For others in the room, it was for a morning jog. For some of us, it's just we're new to Pondi, we want to see the sunrise or the sunset. And these walks and these times on the beach became very special to people for different reasons. I bet all of those reasons could fill the bar one night. If you just did what does the promenade mean to you, it would be, I think you'd have a week's worth of stories at least. So this, I think, again, many of you will be familiar with, which is the fact that we have a very specific layout which the Dutch brought to Pondicherry back in the 17th century. This idea of various quarters. And I spent time roaming around looking, going to temples, going to the churches, hearing about the mosques, walking around the French Quarter. And there's this blue dot here. It's not exactly in the right place, but it is one particular convergence of streets where you have a church, a temple, and a mosque within earshot of one another. And as my tour guide that evening pointed out to me, it's a true Tower of Babel. If you stand right here, between the temple clangings and the calls to prayer from the mosque and whatever's happening in the church, they just echo around one another and create this wonderful atmosphere. And of course, permeating that, you have the ashram ambience sort of, just creating a sort of heaviness in the air. And by heaviness, I mean a certain deliberateness as we move, as we think about what we're doing in this city, why it has brought so many of us here. One of the ghosts that Dilip mentioned is Sri Aurobindo, and what brought him here and what allowed him to kind of exhale a certain set of ideas into a city that is still breathing in and breathing out those same ideas. And I have pages in the book where I feature some wonderful people I met who are now in their 80s. They're actually here amongst us today, sitting toward the front, I think some of them. But they're in their late 70s, early 80s, absolutely young women. I adopted them all as my grandmother. And they moved to Pondicherry as young women with their families, and they were not even teenagers because their parents had come to the ashram and they haven't left. And you ask them to talk to you about Pondicherry, and they say it's become so crowded, it's become so large. And I say, I'm coming from Delhi. Are you crazy? There are many of us here coming from other places. And if Pondi is large and hectic, there's no hope for anyone else. But for them to have seen the city evolve, and evolve out of a certain spiritual commitment, was so special to capture on the page, and I have some mentions of that. Although I think one of the most exciting discoveries for me as I explored sort of Pondi and its environs was, of course, you have the temples, the churches, the mosques, but the Ayanar temples and the shrines that are peppered around in the woods and forests around Pondicherry make for fantastic stories. And just to give you a sense of this Ayanar temple, where these are the main deities, these are the windows here of a nearby building. So these statues are these are lifelike statues. It's not something you encounter in, let's say, the Manipur Vinayak Kovil. The most life-size thing there is Lakshmi, and she's fantastic, the elephant, if you're not familiar. But some of these statues were just, larger than life, and their stories are larger than life. Also, something that I have on the page of the book. Of course, you can't not have a picture of Lakshmi in any slideshow because she's just the coolest. Again, this idea of the ashram sort of being a kind of atmosphere within Pondicherry was something that I loved, and I write about how there were often 4 eyes watching me wherever I went, whatever I was doing. No matter whom I was interviewing or speaking to, whether they were from the ashram or not, whether they knew about Auroville or not, these 4 eyes, whether I was in an auto, just going somewhere totally random, there was a certain sense of, these ghosts watching me and saying, this biography that you're trying to breathe life into, we're keeping tabs. We want to make sure that you do a good job. So just to bring it a little bit into a family story here. So this is my great aunt, who knew some of the women in the room who are here today. They still look a lot like this. They are still as erect and as athletic as this because they continue to do their daily exercises. But my great aunt, my great grandfather, they were here in Pondicherry back in the 50s. And as a result, my grandparents came, and then they had 8 children that they raised in Pondi. Then some of whom had children in Pondicherry, many of whom studied at JIPMER. I know we have some JIPMER representation today. And so for me to meet some of these women who remembered my great aunt, who is in Chennai, as we speak, and they took me in and again shared stories, but gave me a perspective of not just sort of Pondicherry, but the idea that a city can be 80 years old and be young and be athletic and want to do exercise. Again, not something I'm familiar enough with, unfortunately. Another observation I made about Pondicherry is that, does anyone recognize this room? You know where this is? The Roman Roland Library? Yeah, it's It's the reading room. It's air conditioned, which is key, which is why I think it's as crowded as it is in this picture. And by the way, this is about 7:15 a.m. So come, 7 a.m. when this reading room opens, it is full of all these wonderful men catching up on the news, and it's a silent room. The sign over here says, "Silence, please." And they take it very seriously. Hardly a cough, hardly any kind of conversation. But this library is one of, I think, 3 or 4 libraries. And then we have research institutions, again, along the promenade. We also have 4 or 5 bookshops. There are, in fact, something like 7 libraries, 6 bookshops, 4 research institutions, all within a kind of 1.5 by 1.5 kilometer area, which makes for a very complex city. Because why so much archival material sits here is an excellent question. And one that I try to explore as I talk about and visit a lot of these libraries. Some are very small, some are more like, it's the Subramanian Bharati Museum, or it is the intact archives, which are themselves a whole series of bookcases and books. In some cases, it's the public libraries, which even has a children's library in the back. Again, I live in Delhi, where there are some such libraries and children's libraries, but nothing that seems to be as dedicated and as lively and as childlike as the library spaces I've seen here. You have UNESCO World Heritage recognized palm leaf scrolls, Sanskrit scrolls, old Indic material, Indic documentation, all of which, I was looking for maps of old Pondicherry, and I simply had to go 2 blocks that way to the EFEO, the L'École Française d'Extrême-Orient, which had these fantastic maps all folded and tucked away into little drawers, which I kind of opened out, and then, of course, had long discussions with the librarians about these maps and where they came from. And at the other end, not of the promenade, but even of the city sort of boundaries, you have Pondicherry University, and we have some representation from there as well. And they have one of the most digitally enhanced libraries, I would say, that I've seen in India. We're talking 2 massive buildings with fantastic technology. Students with visual impairments can read and work and study and write dissertations. Schools and colleges come from all over Tamil Nadu to use the Pondicherry University Library, and it's just this fantastic modern space. And between that and this, you've got this massive amount of potential for anyone with any kind of literary or scholarly interest or curiosity. A lot of which people satisfy without stepping foot into a library, because you meet anyone in this room, they're going to have stories for you, as Nini and Dilip so wonderfully demonstrated just a few minutes ago. But if you did want to look at a book, turn a page, inhale all that good dust and sort of feel like you were learning something, there are infinite number of these spaces where I was able to go and spend time and really kind of soak up some of that side of Pondi as well. So hopefully we recognize, although the slide is a bit fuzzy, Nehru, Indira Gandhi, E.T. Krishnamacharya, and on this side are my great-grandfather and great-grandmother, who, my great-grandfather at the time was head of the UCO Bank. We all know where the bank is. Like maybe I could say the bank, I don't know, but it's the UCO Bank, I suppose, on one edge of the park. And he was running it at the time, and so when Nehru came in 1955, as Pondicherry was moving toward independence, he was the one to receive him. And there are other pictures where one of my aunts, who's not here today, is sort of hugging one of their legs and sort of wondering what on earth is going on. But, I was hearing stories about things like this my whole life. Not to mention all of the humor and comedy and marvel that comes with hearing about fresh bread from an ashram bakery, and French teachers and classmates of yours who go off to fight wars in France and come back and live these cushy lives. And I was just thinking, what is happening here? Like in what world do French and Tamil and English and soldiers and spirituality all come together? Again on this in this game of boom. And the answer is right here. Pictures like this, of course, made me very curious and interested in Bondi. And this is my great-grandfather's passport. It's a French document, as you can see. And I really only have it up here because my great-grandfather clearly had a sense of humor. For color of hair, he's written black turning gray. So clearly, UCO Bank Bondi was a very stressful time in his life, and I don't know if it's still as stressful today. Probably is, but the UCO Bank building, we've all walked past it, and it's a beautiful, majestic space. And my great aunt, that's her, was with me walking around Pondicherry just a year and a half ago when we were exploring together. And she said, I used to live in this building, when her father was at Bank. I said, yeah, that's cool. I mean, I wish we could go in. She said, yeah, we can go in. I said, no, what do you mean we can go in? So we talked to the security guard, and she simply said, no, I used to live there, so I'd like to go see my old house. And he didn't know what to make of this request. I mean, how often does someone come up to you, the watchman at a bank, and say, I used to live there? But she's good at sweet talking, and she sweet talked her way in, and we got to go in and see the ballroom, and she waved, from what used to be her room, and we became great friends with the AGM, and my great grandfather is, sitting in this picture. This is Yuko Bank in the 50s, this is Yuko Bank today, and through her, again, I got this wonderful blend of what I was seeing in front of me in that very minute, what Yuko Bank looks like today, and the stories of how the Bank of Indochina became Yuko Bank, which became, was a home, now a bank, and so on and so forth. And again, these stories abound. But really, what I was hoping to do was have a few such stories, but then have all of your voices and all of your current living stories breathe together, talk together, so that my book could be a kind of living document about, what Pondicherry is all about. And I'll end there. Family in my old grandfather's house, and us in the same house, which is just in Ilambunagar, a few minutes away from here. And I have a clip which I won't play, but this woman recognized my grandmother when I simply asked her if she knew of a family that used to live on a particular street in Pondi, and she said, yes, I know, that was Madhuram, right, who was my grandmother. And I didn't know this woman I happened to see her on a street, on Perumal Code Street, and I just went to her and said, did you remember there was once a couple who lived down the road? And she said, yeah, they had like 5 girls and 2 boys, and her hair turned gray really quickly, probably because of all the kids. And I love this about Indian grandmothers. They're just so candid. And she goes on to remember my grandmother, and this is in the midst of my field work, when I'm meeting all of you who have no family connection to me, and yet it turns out we all know each other's grandmothers, which really is why we should write books, so that we can harness all the grandmothers in us and who have been there before us, and pay homage to them. So she is Vatsala Party. She knew my party. And on that note, I will just say thank you, and I've dedicated the book to my grandparents because they made it possible for me to want to be in Pondicherry. And of course, my father, my they are here, and they kept those stories alive. And hopefully there are more stories to keep the interest in Pondi alive for all of you to read. I keep saying that, but I'm a teacher, so I like to hammer instructions into people's heads. And I will stop here. Thank you all so much.